About 2 years ago, Marty moved in. I had a 4-bedroom house in Lake Worth, Florida, and had recently been put on furlough at the workplace, so I needed a roommate. At first I didn't think I was going to take him as a roommate, seeing as he was 32 years older than me, extremely fat, and he warned me that he is mentally ill, being a pathological liar, and having something ranging between borderline personality disorder and manic depression. But this is South Florida, and the only other options were older people, fans of Sublime, and drugs. Against my girlfriend Michelle's reservations, I called him back after 2 weeks of failed interviews. Marty was the one who told us about the antique sale, about a year after he moved in. There are estate sales involving the wealthy all over South Florida, but he knew of a place that did a running auction every week and had incredible prices. Michelle was actually so thrilled she pretended not to be disgusted by Marty, who generally hid in his room, smoked pot, and cried a lot. I had secretly gotten used to him. Michelle had moved in about 6 months after him, and didn't seem to mind the additional household income. She had graduated with a degree in healthcare administration, and was getting desperate about the lack of job opportunities, making her a bit curt at the time. But she is a sweetheart by default, and her love of horror movies and pot eventually made me consider proposing to her. Marty had eventually told me that he moved in because his mother had passed away, and she was working herself to the bone until the day she died to support him. He was pretty old at 61, but he still wasn't able to make more than minimum wage because of his emotional instability. He came home covered in sweat every day after taking the Palm Tran bus system to his data entry job in Boca Raton. I was worried he might kill himself on the best days, and I was pretty happy that Michelle actually feigned an interest in the poor guy's well-being during the days leading up to our expedition to a massive, poorly ventilated warehouse far out west in the swamps of Loxahatchee. The goods were all on display, antiques that were both expensive and cheap-looking, by virtue of them being crammed together with Tiffany lamps resting on cheap kitchen tables. Michelle noticed it in a moment. A set of dark wood tropical-themed bedroom furniture that looked like it had been hand-carved. The porters working the auction looked at each other queasily when she settled on the set, probably aware of how heavy it must be. She fumbled her bright red hair into a knot and tugged desperately at the corner of a pallet, unable to even get a small nightstand to budge. For some reason, this delighted her, and I could tell from the smile on her face that the cost of Marty continuing to live in my house was my bedroom looking like a tropical tomb. Marty stared transfixed to an amazing, massive old television set from the 1970s, complete with a phone and turntable that looked like it would be at home on the show Mad Men. We turned it on, and the picture quality was amazing. Michelle happily speculated as to what the set might bid for while we took our seats and filled out a payment card. When it came time for the bidding, everyone was so concerned with a Cord race car from before World War II that no one even competed with Michelle's lowball. At that point, even I was excited. The set came with a 4-poster bed and a wardrobe that later we would almost take out a doorway to get in. But for $150 total, it was worth it. I bought Marty the TV he had been ogling for $30 and tipped the guys who packed the stuff into my truck, not bothering to sit through the rest of the auction. We went home, packed our bongs, and called for some movers to get the absurdly heavy furniture in. They even managed to avoid scratching the wood floors and only chipped a little stucco off the ancient Spanish mission-style walls. At the end of the day, hours later, Marty had hooked up his old TV, and Michelle used some doodad to allow a more modern input. This allowed us to watch Michelle's favorite horror classic, a flick where a killer wearing a gold and black Venetian carnival mask and a business suit massacres a family. I took some breaks from the movie I didn't really like the first 20 times to admire the craftsmanship of my new furniture. Motifs of what looked like people in chains carrying fruits were barely noticeable below the massive bronze palm fronds sticking out of the elegant woodwork. It was a bit creepy looking, but I had always wanted a 4-poster bed, and this thing looked like it was expensive as hell. After smoking and laughing our way through the visual marvels of the Italian 1970s, Michelle and I crashed. That night, Michelle couldn't keep still for a second. She kept tossing and turning. When she finally woke, I was already awake and offered to get her a drink, but she burst into tears instead of responding directly. After a few minutes of sobbing, she explained that in her dream, the man in the gold and black mask was trying to kill her. Clearly a problem only a bowl of late-night ice cream could help with. Marty had fallen asleep on the couch while watching some cheesy sitcom from the late 70s, where everyone learned a valuable moral lesson at the end of every episode, and everyone had feathered hair, but the screen had since turned to snow. We decided not to wake him and instead enjoyed our ice cream in the kitchen with the admittedly catchy tune in the background while the computer attached to the TV cued the next episode. While we were washing the dishes, we heard a car pull up loudly in front of the house. Michelle wandered over to the front blinds and absent-mindedly peeked outside, probably expecting it to be our neighbor who is a prostitute coming home. She squeaked in alarm and covered her mouth, darting away from the window the second she had seen whatever was in the front lawn. She grabbed me and dragged me to the front door and pointed at the peephole. When I looked through, the man in the gold and black carnival mask was stepping out of a lowered bright turquoise marathon taxi, whose lights had just fallen dim. He stepped confidently down our front path with a gem-topped cane he used to impale an old woman in the movie. "Is everything cool?" Marty asked nervously after turning off the television, apparently awoken by our scurrying. Hold on. Should we call the cops, or is this a prank? Because if it's not a prank, we should call the cops," Michelle said, entirely within one rapid-fire breath. I looked through the peephole again, but the car and the killer in the mask were both suddenly gone. I rushed to the side of the house the path is closest to, but I didn't see anyone there or in the backyard, where we have motion-sensitive lights. I turned the lights in the front yard on and looked through the other side, but I didn't see any sign of the car or the killer in the mask. After a few hours, the sleepiness won, and we went back to the bedroom, trying to convince ourselves that it was just a hypnagogic hallucination or something. The next day when we woke up, Michelle was covered in sweat and shaking. She told me she had experienced another nightmare, again with the killer. We smoked an awful lot of pot, and I thanked God it was Sunday, so we didn't have to go to work on top of it all. After cleaning up the house and putting our unused furniture as well as the giant TV set away, we discussed whether or not what happened was real. Neither of us knew. We got out of the house and went to the Clematis area, where they had a small but well-attended farmer's market nearby. I began to plot out the ways that we could avoid going home, leading us to a trip to the Norton Art Gallery, where we almost ran over some Christians going to the creepy private university on the water. Michelle asked me if I thought there was anything wrong with the furniture, and I simply didn't know what to say. Eventually, we went home, watched a movie, and smoked more pot, this time on the laptop. I heard Marty laughing softly in his room over the theme to his favorite sitcom, and smiled to myself, hoping the events of the previous night were just a weird reaction to bad weed. I hoped the memory of it would go away just like the weird squeak in my car engine somehow did so, that I could go back to enjoying my new furniture without worrying about it having been possessed or something. Weeks passed by, and then months. Eventually, we forgot about the creep in the turquoise car, and I simply stopped thinking about it. Eventually, life moved on, in other ways as well. Michelle and I were getting pretty serious at the time, and I was thinking more about how to pop the question than whether or not I should. Finally, the day came where Marty got a legitimate promotion. He was going to be the data manager of a call center that did data input from a census. He was going to make enough to live on his own and even afford a car. We talked about it, and without directly addressing the issue, he mentioned that he had been looking into cheap efficiencies. Michelle was bouncing with joy when I finally brought up our talks of getting married and moving to Fort Pierce, to a place that was dirt cheap and right on the water. It may have been the best night of my life. A week or two later, and I noticed Marty had a beaten-up Ford Taurus in the driveway, so I congratulated him with a six-pack of good beers he had always loved. A few weeks after that, there were boxes in his bedroom and the living room when I came home, and I knew the day had come. That night, he told us he had finally found a place, and although he was already paid up on the rent, and we were just going month to month, he was ready to go. He was checking through his stuff when he got to that badass old TV from the auction. Seeing as it was likely his last night, we decided to fire the thing up and watch some movies. While Michelle went to pick up some Cuban sandwiches, Marty and I had a brief heart-to-heart where he told me he was actually terrified of being lonely again, like after his mother died. He had never had friends growing up, and he had been considering suicide when he moved in with me. Being mentally ill, he had a difficult enough time getting care, much less fitting in with society. I sympathized with him and told him how proud I was that he was moving on. Michelle came home. He dried his eyes, and we enjoyed a movie about a woman who was tricked into moving into a haunted castle where she was hounded by a ghost in an ancient hoop skirt. We smoked, laughed, and talked about how the cost of rent had gotten too high in Palm Beach lately. When we went to sleep, I wondered briefly how the hell we would move my heavy furniture, seeing as it had strained the hell out of my truck previously. When I woke up, it was the dead of night, and Michelle was pulling at the sleeve of my t-shirt. I turned over to look at her face, and she was shaking and crying, covering her mouth so as to not make a sound. She pointed expectantly at the hallway beyond our bedroom doorway. I could see the old TV was still on, blaring snow, but as my eyes adjusted to the limited light, I saw something else. A tall, elegant-looking woman in a white dress stood in our living room. She was turned away from us, but I could see her hair was perfectly white, just like her hoop skirt dress. Aside from the splash of red with intestines hanging from her torso, there was no color to the woman at all. I don't know why I did what I did then, but I turned the table lamp in my room on and meekly said, "Hello?" I think I expected it to be a trick of the eyes, maybe Marty from an odd angle. The face that turned to me wasn't Marty. An old woman, skin as dry as parchment. Her head turned 180 degrees on her neck like a swivel, allowing me to see the perfectly white orbs of her eyes. Michelle moaned in terror, and the thing swept towards us, hovering gracefully over the ground as her hands outstretched in our direction. A horrific growl escaped her lips as her head corrected its direction, at which point I snapped out of it enough to get off the bed and slam the bedroom door closed. This was the moment where I regretted giving Marty the only bedroom with a window, simply because it didn't have its own bathroom. Michelle made a sound that was somewhere between the word no and a moan, while grabbing a baseball bat I kept near the bed to give to me. I locked the door a split second before the knob suddenly began rattling. As I ran from the door to get Michelle, I heard something hard scrape deliberately around the edges of the door before ripping angrily into the wood. It didn't sound like the thing was trying to smash the door as much as scratch rapidly through it. The thing rasped with rage as its long fingernails tore through the wood as easily as knives. Michelle began to whimper on the bed as I braced myself. First, some of the wood on our side chipped away. Then enough wood was ripped away to see the edges of the slender razor-sharp fingernails attacking the door. Michelle began to call 911, something we probably should have done to begin with, when suddenly the assault stopped. It took a few seconds to work up the courage to look through the holes on the door, but when I did, I saw Marty at the end of the hall, near the living room, looking dumbfounded. Are you okay? I asked, hoping to God this wasn't some kind of trap. Yeah. Are you? Marty seemed baffled that I asked him this question. Yeah. I looked at Michelle, whose eyes were blurry and red as she put down her phone cautiously. I turned off the TV. It disappeared then. Marty was about to go on, but he didn't seem to know what to say. After a few minutes of just sitting there, looking at the door that had almost been breached, I finally got up and went to the living room to talk to Marty. Michelle clung closely behind me. Marty was standing in front of the TV, staring at it, when it seemed to click in Michelle's head what had happened. Holy shit, it's the fucking TV! You saved our fucking lives! She exclaimed, cursing more than she normally did in a week. Marty smiled sheepishly before turning a concerned look over to the TV. He unplugged the jury-rigged jack from the back before backing away from it. Michelle began looking up hotels right away, clearly not interested in taking chances with that TV, even if it was on the curb. We contacted a realtor the next day, and she signed a lease while on her lunch break. She never slept in that house again, and just to be on the safe side, we sold the bedroom furniture too. I was pretty sad to see the house empty, but I was sure life would move on. I was even thinking about when would be the best time to get a first checkup beer with Marty. 4 days later, I stopped by the old house to get the last of my things. And when I opened the front door, the first thing I saw was that TV. Back in the now empty living room, blaring music. I almost slammed the door and said fuck it. But the music sounded powerfully familiar. I cautiously leaned to the side and sure enough, it was Marty's favorite 70s sitcom. I slowly put one foot after the other and looked around the room to make sure no demons were around before moving to pull the plug. Before I could, the main character, a man with feathered hair who worked at a Ford plant, began telling his son to be on his best behavior while meeting the new neighbor. I happened to take a risky glance at the screen, and that's when I saw him. There was no mistaking Marty, even though he was decades younger. His hair was jet black, and he wasn't nearly as fat as he shook Dan Carlisle's hand. Before I unplugged the thing, I saw him look into the camera, smile, and wink. I can't wait to start my new life here, was the last thing I heard him say before the screen went black. I try and think about that every time I think about him. He deserved a happy life with cheesy morals and catchy theme songs. I know that no one will probably care, but this one is dedicated to my old roommate. He was a great, if misunderstood guy, and I miss him a lot some days.